All right. Good evening. That was very interesting. I love that. I'm Steve Vai, and thank you. It's really nice to be here. This is a cool event you guys got going on, and I'm looking forward to watching it grow. Right? Very cool. And it's really quite a privilege and an honor because I get to honor one of the people in this business that I admire so much. I've probably one of the most, and I love this business. You know, the music business. It's good. I've been in it for now 40 years, and it's filled with creative people, interesting. You know, it could be a star overnight sometimes, and it's like a family. Do you ever feel that? Like we are actually part of a musical family, making music for the world. That's a nice thing. So I was asked to speak for about 10 minutes, but since I'm talking about Bernie, I might go on a little longer. It's all right. You know, it's funny because since about mid-1940s, if you took a huge like audio funnel and you took every kind of medium that's ever been invented, you know, whether it's all sorts of tapes, cassettes, DATs, remember DATs? 8-tracks, records, all sorts of vinyl, CDs, and the ethereal digital realm, and you put it in this giant funnel. It all comes out at some point. It has to go through the mastering process. Right? You have to master, whether you like it or not. It's kind of like taxes. Except a little more expensive occasionally. So mastering is the final step before delivery to the manufacturers for mass production, and the person that takes that last step for us has to have the most refined ears in the business, and that's the mastering engineer. Because mastering requires such critical thinking, critical listening. Their ears have to be totally different, you know, they're kind of like they're attached to different kinds of brain muscles than ours. And mastering require, well, okay, wait a minute. I don't like reading, but I got a lot here and I don't want to mess it up. So, you know, we all look forward to that final fix-it job, you know, where hopefully everything that we've done will just start sparkling and shining. And you know, there's one name that has eclipsed all others in regard to having those ears. And that's Bernie Grundman. So a little history on Bernie. In 1968, Sterling Sound became the first studio in the US to cut stereo discs. And that's when the role of the transfer engineer, because back then it didn't really require much artistry. You just had to make sure that you know, the stuff got across. But it started to shift around 1940 because of it was purely a technical process, and eventually these engineers needed to start to learn how to affect the stereo signal and add width to it and EQ and frequency balance and dynamics with the use of compressors. So it wasn't until then that actually those elements started to come in place. And this opened up a whole new creative world for these engineers, and they had to make more and more creative decisions. And that's when the need for the most artistic and inspired ears were born. And the term transfer engineer eventually gave way to mastering engineer. And Bernie was right on time. His name is virtually synonymous with mastering. Bernie started listening very deeply when he was just a kid. Born in Minneapolis, at 8 years of age, he moved to Phoenix, where he grew up. And on discovering Study in Brown, the 1955 album by jazz trumpeter Clifford Brown and drummer Max Roach, he was blown away, and that just set his trajectory. And as a teenager, he was a hi-fi enthusiast, and he worked part-time as a drummer for various groups throughout the city. Around the same time, he started hanging out in the projectionist's booth at a small theater where his mom worked as a bookkeeper, right? And his fascination with film and audio equipment eventually led to him to pull together his own primitive sound system with money that he earned parking cars. Later, when he was older, like 19, He opened up an after-hours jazz club and befriended local musicians and just started recording them. Where'd you get the fake ID for that? It was after hours, okay. And in 1961, check this out, this is great. He joined the Air Force and expanded his technical knowledge working in the Air Force Electronic Countermeasures Division on radar jamming equipment. Still doing it, yes, you are. That's when Bernie discovered what happens if you take 150 dB of 30 cycles and you jam it into the radar of an airplane with no compression. After serving in the Air Force, in 1965, he drove straight to Hollywood and walked into Capitol Records and asked the head of recording, okay, what do I need to do to be a recording engineer? And then in 66, he became a mixer, mastering. If I'm wrong at any of this, let me know, okay? You could throw something. In 66, he became a mixer, mastering engineer, and a maintenance technician for the studio of the highly respected Contemporary Records label. And in 68, he made a move to A&M and started their mastering division, which was the top operation in the industry at the time. And the amount of records he mastered while at A&M is vast and covered all of the greatest artists signed to that label at the time. Some of those albums he mastered at the time were like Carole King's Tapestry, Prince's Purple Rain, Dr. Dre's The Chronic, of course, Michael Jackson's Thriller, the biggest selling album of all time. And after 15 years at A&M, Bernie had the pull to start his own mastering lab. And in '84, he opened Bernie Grundman Mastering. And of course, this is where the bar on mastering was seriously raised. He would spend nights and weekends putting together his dream with the late, great Carl Bischoff and built the EQs that would launch literally thousands and thousands of hit records. He has mastered recordings on every major analog and digital recording format and has provided services for every major label. Suffice to say that in 2005, BGM, Bernie Grundman Mastering, Studios mastered 37 projects which received Grammy Awards nominations. And in 1977, he opened up Bernie Grundman Mastering Studios in Tokyo. He has mastered everything from bluegrass to death metal. And he told me that his favorite music is death metal. I don't think so. Actually, he loved the whole Blue Note thing, and still does. And although Bernie's technology sets the digital streaming and CD standards for today, more than ever, he is still the true sensei master and indigo child of the LP cutting lathe. And I remember when I was young and I was, honing my guitar chops in my little lonely teenage Long Island bedroom. And I'd see these albums come by, and I'd start seeing these names on some of my favorite albums, mastering. And the whole idea of mastering, I had no idea what it was, but it held an incredible mystique, you know? And every time I'd see that name, I'd go, who's this guy, you know? So the mystique just kind of built and built. And when I finally moved to California, when I was 20 in 1980, I started working for Frank Zappa. And I remember being up at Frank's studio, and he had refs that had come in that had Bernie's name on it. So this like completely solidified the legendary status that was growing in my mind about Bernie. And so I've been kind of like touring and recording for about 40 years now. 40. Did I say 40? Wow. And, I've always enjoyed and was fascinated with the whole, what's under the hood of the audio spectrum, So I've always mixed and produced and engineered all my own records. I just enjoy doing that. But whenever it came time for the mastering, that was a big boy game, and I was just like, I don't think I want to go there. It's kind of like on a guitar, they have these truss rods that are inside of the neck of the guitar, and it's like, Steve, you can do anything you want with that guitar. You can beat on it, you can play on it, you can change the knobs, but don't you ever touch that truss rod, because you'll break the neck. So I'm like, okay, I never touched a truss rod in my life, and I'll never, it's like mastering. Just one of those things you got to let go of. So finally, when I did my second solo record in 1989, Passion and Warfare, I had an opportunity, I had a budget, and I had an opportunity to actually get it mastered properly, and I thought, I know, I'm going to go to Bernie. And I was scared to death, to bring him my work, and I remember walking into the hollowed halls of BGM and first meeting Bernie, and his mastering room is sort of like the Starship Enterprise, you know what I mean? And he's like Dr. McCoy. You walk in with your masters, and he pulled this little thing out and beep, beep, beep over the masters, and he said, all healed. But he was very kind, and he was really it was a warm place, and it was a nice place to be. And he absolutely eased my insecurities. And I knew lurking under that famous tuft of black hair was a gentle giant. And I watched and studied everything he was doing and came to realize that I didn't know anything about these incredible nuances that take place in mastering. And watching Bernie navigate the helm of his Starship was fascinating. And this was kind of like before CDs, so we were going right to vinyl. And it's just so interesting to watch him listen and put his hands on and then, back then you had to listen to the song, make all your EQ moves, and then in the little space between the songs, you had to make all your moves. And it would be so funny to be, in this relaxed state with Bernie, and he's kind of listening and, and sipping a little coffee, and then all of a sudden there's the blank space, and he turns into like... it's kind of like... What? Steve, how you doing? Yeah, so no, that's sounding pretty good. Okay, wait a minute. Give me 1 second. All done. Okay. And I watched and studied everything that he did, and I was thinking, maybe if I watch him and if I maybe get some of this gear, maybe I don't know, maybe I could learn to master myself. And so I started asking him all these questions about mastering and his process and everything, and very accommodating, very selfless, shares all the information, and he says, well, our mastering consoles are custom built, and all the ancillary equipment is designed and built on site in the lab. We have 24 band equalizers and limiters all integrated within the console as a holistic implementation. We have We have on site virtually every digital audio workstation and software signal processor formats ever invented. Our ATR and Studer tape decks are available for playback and recording with both tube and discrete solid-state electronics. Our modified Scully lathes are controlled by the CompuDisc 80 mastering computers. Heiko Westrex cutting heads are driven by either solid or tube electronics. Monitors are Tannoy bi-am systems with in-house crossovers, driven by modified Crown DC 300 heads. And our consoles are discrete dual-bank preview program designs for proper lacquer cutting. They are designed and built on-site. We start with first reviewing 1 million of the available components, and then we tear them apart and rebuild about 90% of them, and then with special components we make in the back room that are forged out of hellfire, a little pinch of espresso, and some fairy dust.
That's why nobody will compete with us.
Oh, and then we send them to NASA to have 2 complete space stations inserted into them. And I'm sitting there like writing all this down. It's like, is hellfire 2 words? And then he says, well, whatever gear we use, the music has to go through my ears before any of the dials are touched. And that's when I said, okay, I ain't touching this shit. And one of the great things, I believe the reason Bernie's mastering transcends the most excellent use of this gear, all the custom gear that's built, it transcends this because Bernie, he feels the music when he's mastering. You can see him. It's not, the whole academics and the technology is wildly in place, but it's useless unless you got the ears. And it takes an inspired listening. And, we're blessed to have this man doing that for us. Since then, I've mastered all of my records with Bernie, and on my records, he's credited as mastered by Bernie Grundman himself. Yeah. And I have to, anybody that's mastered with Bernie, you know, there's one thing that we really love to have, and that's the feeling that they got your back. You know, anybody, whether it's your secretary or your anything we do, it's really nice knowing when whoever you're working with is just bulletproof. There is like no way that deadline isn't going to be met if you deliver it. And countless times I've been, probably as many of you have been, in very precarious situations where that master had to be delivered. And you know when you're working with Bernie, because of this incredible team that he surrounds himself with, that whatever it is, it's going to get done, and your masters are safe. And I've come to him 20, 30 years later. Hey, do you guys have those masters for this? Yep, here they are. And it's just a feeling of security, and you can't buy that, you know? I remember once, oh my goodness, I was on tour. I was in Turkey, and I had to finish my record, and I had my laptop, and I'm backstage in Turkey, and the room's falling apart. Everybody's waiting on the bus, and I'm back there trying to find, make sure that my computer doesn't get unplugged because the battery's dead, just so I can finish this last mix and get it to Bernie, who was waiting for it. And just at the last minute, I just sent that button, and I knew that it was going to appear on my record exactly the way I wanted it. And like I say, you can't buy that. And that's what you get also, and I've always gotten with Bernie and his team. And there's a lot of other reasons I love, there's a lot of other nice things about going down to Bernie's labs and mastering, is just the environment. It's so warm and inviting, and they've beautiful art festooning the walls by his absolutely charming and lovely wife, Claire, who's been supportive for so many years. She runs the business, yeah, right. Yeah. And interestingly enough, if you go to Bernie's, you're going to experience the very best coffee in Southern California. Because this man takes his coffee very seriously. I mean, his espresso machine. Say what? That's right. It rivals his lathe. You know, it's gold plated and all that. But if I just tell you one funny story. One time I was in Bali, and in Bali they have these weird little creatures. They're called luwaks, and they're like marsupials, and they live in the jungle. And there's a specific place in Bali where these really fine coffee beans grow. And these weird little marsupial animals go out and they eat the most ripe, delicious, robust coffee beans from the tree, you know? They just have an instinct to do that. And the flesh of the bean dissolves in them, and then they poop out the seed. And then there's people that go around and pick all this up, crush it up, and make coffee. So I had to get some. I was thinking of Bernie when I was there. I had to get some. And I brought it back to him, and I gave it to him. This was years ago. I brought it back to him and gave it to him. I said, put that in your console. So I also want to say congratulations, because vinyl sales are up. And I remember in the 90s going into the Bernie Studios, and the vinyl machine, the lathe was kind of like covered up and put to bed. And it was kind of sad, but it's so nice to see those machines spinning again. And the fact that it's Bernie doing it on so much vinyl now, in even 2019, is really good news for all of us. And as you know, vinyl is on the rise. It has been. Vinyl revenue grew by 12.8% in the second half of 2018 and 12.9% in the first 6 months of 2019. And it's now poised to outsell CDs for the first time since 1986. Yeah. And you can be sure that a huge percentage of those records will flow through Bernie's ears. You know, as a species, one of the two things we're always kind of pining for is quality and convenience, right? We want it now, and we want it to be better than before. And we should. We have that right. And why not? That's right. And through the years, Bernie Grundman has been one of our avatars that all else turn to find the highest quality and convenience available in the field of mastering. In the past 40 years, I've had the privilege of being at a lot of award ceremonies and receiving a lot of awards, and I hosted the pre-telecast of the Grammys for 5 years, so I've personally handed out hundreds of Grammys. And I've kind of pulled back I don't vote on anything anymore. I don't judge contests, and I even rarely contribute to awards, and I've even stopped accepting them. But in this case, I feel that this Lifetime Achievement Award could not be more appropriately celebrated for a man whose passionate contribution to our amazing industry has changed the way we hear music and has improved the quality of our lives. So in mastering, if mastering is the last step of our music to reach the enlightened heights of audio heaven, then Bernie Grundman is God. And this godly reverence is justified. And so it is such an honor for me to be here and to celebrate you. You are extraordinary, and we are grateful. So it is with exceptional honor and privilege that I offer this award for lifetime achievement to one of our industry's true geniuses. Folks, Bernie Grundman himself. Go for it.
Thank you, Steve. What could be better than to receive it from Steve Vai? I mean,
That's nice.
it's beautiful, beautiful.
I'm not in this picture, though. What up?
Oh, hey, what happened? Yeah, what happened? Yeah, wow, okay. Well, he covered a lot of ground there. I don't know if there's much more I can say about what I do, but I think there's some very basic fundamental things, if you really think about it, that I also talk about in seminars and so forth, and Steve talked a little bit about it. What is music? I mean, let's face it, it's an emotional expression of the human experience. And all you need to do, like what I need to do, is I need to be in touch in an emotional way with how it's communicating to me. I can only make decisions unless I have to make decisions when I'm feeling how I'm affecting the music. So I have to know, I can't be prejudiced either, So any kind of music that comes in, I have to be willing to be open emotionally to it, so that when I do something, I'll know if I'm making it a better and more complete or more connected experience emotionally, because that's all it is. And it can be polka music, it can be Hawaiian, it doesn't matter. It's all different points of view. And so it's simple, but it's also difficult, because we all have certain preferences in music, but it's really all the same thing. And it's all for different, some of it's a narrow, like dance music, something like that. But if it's not done well, it's not going to make you want to get up and dance. Or if it's a different type of music, like classical, you don't play that at a party. So all of this stuff comes into play, and if you just spend time, anyone can spend time to actually experience any type of music and get on that wavelength. That's what we have to do as mastering engineers anyway. We have to be open enough and not prejudiced. So, because, when I was a teenager, I was like a lot of teenagers. I knew everything, and I was a snob. So, and I was this bebop jazz guy and all that, like Steve was talking about. But as time went on, I started to realize, after spending a lot of time mastering all different kinds of music, that I could actually get in touch with it And then I began to realize that in all the different arts and so forth in the world, it takes time and it takes involvement. And actually, this whole vinyl thing, resurgence of vinyl, is kind of interesting because what I've noticed is that, there's a whole generation of kids that didn't have vinyl. They had streaming, they have iTunes. These are all inferior formats. And a lot of them have never even heard good sound. And I get reports from people, their grandchildren or their teenage grandchildren or whatever, when they play them really well produced and recorded music, they're shocked at how much more it gives them than what they were doing. And I think what happens is with vinyl makes you stop and pay attention to what you're doing. Because you have to go through this ritual. You have to take it out of this jacket, you have to put it on the turntable, you have to, so here you are. You're paying attention. And the only way you're going to get a lot out of music is to get involved. And it's an automatic thing we hear these stories about these kids getting together and listening to records together. What a concept. So, that's why, because I would, like Steve was saying, I've been in it a while. And it's true. When I got in, I was fortunate. I got in when it became a creative process, when we could manipulate the sound. That's because I was at Contemporary, the jazz label, where they had built all this equipment, custom equipment, and so we could manipulate the sound, and so I got this big following, just because I could change things. Because in the past, if you had to change, if you made a record for Columbia, and you were going to master it, and you took it to the mastering engineer, all he knew was how to cut a good disc that would plate well and would track well, but he would not manipulate the sound. And if you wanted to change the sound, you had to take it into the studio, put the EQ on it that you wanted, on that tune or whatever, make a tape copy, insert it in the assembly, give it to the mastering engineer, he cut it flat. So here I was in the mid-'60s, being able to change the sound and adjust things and manipulate it so that there was more consistency or there's more of this, what I'm talking about, this emotional connection. And of course, because the whole thing is trying to serve the music. That's what we're really trying to do. And Bruce Swedin, an old friend of mine, did all Michael Jackson stuff. That's all his premise is that we're really there to do something that's beneficial to the music. We want to be able to present it in a good, easy way for the public to connect with it emotionally. So this whole resurgence of vinyl is really interesting because if it's done properly, it can be a great experience, and it can be done, it has to be done, in maybe a purist form. And a lot of the reissuing things that we do, we go back to the original tapes, and we don't do a lot of processing because there's a lot of things that go on in the industry for commercial reasons that people want to get attention. And so there's a lot of processing, limiting compression, plugins, all these kind of things that we can do, but you're degrading the signal a lot. But it does come, when you play it, it gets your attention. But I don't know if you're going to want to listen all the way. Especially after you get through a few tunes, it's like you're fatigued. So it should be, that's a different kind of experience. And there's other things that will lend itself to. And even sometimes it works because it does do something that contributes to the effectiveness of the music, like street stuff. You want it real funky, you want it maybe dirty. So, okay, so you got to be able to do that too as a mastering engineer, because you're there to actually interface with the client, with the artist, with the producer, whoever you're working with. And yeah, you might have ideas on what you think is going to make it work, and you can suggest things and so forth, but really, you're really trying to help that person realize their dream. Same way with a mixer. All of these things come into play. Now, I went through that whole period, like he was talking about, where it was almost dead in the early 90s. Almost nothing was happening. And people like Michael Fremer started to talk about how great vinyl is in this, in that whole period that they liked between the late 50s, early 60s, all those direct-to-two-track recordings. And I was working for a company where it actually started to come back. Vinyl actually started to come back in the mid-60s. And I did maybe 500-600 albums for this one company for the next 4 or 5 years, and it started it rolling. But it didn't really start crossing over until the last 6 years or so. Now we have Japan is trying to catch up. Japan is starting to reissue all their historically famous recordings on vinyl. We're doing a lot of work for Thailand, for Taiwan, you name it, for even France and Europe. So there's a lot of activity, except that there's a lot of things that people don't understand about vinyl. And vinyl is a real moving target. And like Steve was talking about, and like a lot of people are aware of, it's a difficult medium. And it's really difficult to maintain a consistent quality. That's why it's almost like an art form when it comes to plating and pressing, and because you can line up 10 different pressing plants and all of the final pressings will sound different. So it's really, and then whatever you play it on, every cartridge is going to sound a little different. Some will track S's better than other cartridges, so who do you make the record for? I mean, if you make it for someone that bought a Crosley Urban Outfitters player, they practically make a new record every time they play it. So, you know, so yeah, but then again, when you think about it, I mean, they probably aren't that quality conscious anyway if you're going to buy a $100 record player, but you know, we have to all think about all that kind of stuff. It's got to at least kind of track. So, so it's really, I mean, I have to compliment everyone that's involved in the making of vinyl. I mean, I really should be giving all of you an award, people that are involved in this, because there's a lot of aggravation. I mean, but you know, it's such an interesting kind of nice medium when it really works. You know, it's one of those things where you work and you work and you work and you try to come out with the best product, and you don't, you know, sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't, and sometimes, like they were saying, it can be pretty bad. But when it's good, I mean, I recently had a project that I did. I sent it to one of the plants in Germany, and they paid me to listen to it from top to bottom, all 8 sides. And I thought, well, okay, if you want me to do it. And I was shocked. There was absolutely no noise on all 8 records, all 8 sides. I was shocked. I don't think I've ever experienced that many sides in a row that were perfect. It sounded like I was listening to a lacquer. However, it's not really as good as a lacquer. I have never heard a pressing that sounds as good as a lacquer, now, because of all the processing it has to go through. But some people get pretty close. And there's new things on the horizon. See, that's the whole thing. There's been this whole new energy coming into the industry. I mean, I've been in it a long time, but now there's new people coming in, like the people in Austria with this new 3D printing stuff and all of this. I mean, I don't know what it's going to be like. I talked to them last night, and I told them, I said, well, you know, it sounds like a really interesting thing. You're going to cut out a few processes and so forth. I says, but in the end, it has to sound good. And the only thing that's going to tell you if it sounds good are your ears. You can line up all the test equipment. The test equipment never can tell you what we hear, because we're listening to complex information, and there's nothing that can measure that. And all of these pieces of equipment that we work with sound, I mean, they can measure the same on our simple kind of distortion analyzers, but they all sound different usually. And some are more accurate than others. And so the key thing to any engineer is the monitor and the speaker, and the listening, how you listen, and being able to judge, because it's a responsibility of an engineer to have the right tools around him, and the right equipment. absolutely necessary, and it's a responsibility. You don't just walk in and take anything and expect to be able to manipulate the sound in the way you want to. You have to have the right tools around you. So, but then you have to have, like I was saying earlier, you have to have a direction. And that's what it can be developed, I think. I've done a lot of seminars on this, who knows? But I really admire the fact that everybody has really revived vinyl, because when it's good, it's really impressive. Because it's the only way that we can really, put it this way. I mean, I think the object is, with all of this stuff, is how do we get to the public a mass-produced product? Yeah, the lacquer's great, but they don't get the lacquer. That's very expensive. So how can we replicate that? How can we manufacture that so that the public is hearing what we're hearing? I mean, a lot of pressing plants don't even know. And they'll come up with a test pressing, and you'll say, "God, you've lost a lot. It doesn't sound anywhere near like the lacquer." Well, it sounded good to us. Well, yeah, because they have nothing to compare to. We know what's happened. Because we've heard the original, we've even heard the tape. We know if our system is good, if the system is sounding exactly like what we're cutting, but after it leaves us, then it's going through all these other processes that can change it dramatically, or it can actually keep it relatively close, but it'll never be the same as the lacquer. Never as perfect, because the lacquer is completely silent, nothing, there's nothing there. It's the purest way. So what I'm really getting at is that there's a lot of work to be done still, because how are we going to get consistency into it? And some guys are pretty good at it, but how do we quantify that? How do we learn more and try to get this to be consistent? Because of the way records are made, it's hard to control things. And I will say this, though. On average, pressings and records are better than they've ever been. And maybe it's because it came out of the audiophile world when it came back, and they're very critical. The audiophiles are very critical. So everybody was really being very careful. There weren't like millions of records being made. There were small runs. So everybody was concentrating on quality. So they developed a better way, a more quality way of going about it. Because, vinyl was getting a little bit of a bad name in the early 80s and stuff, because there were so many warped records, off-center, noisy records, just a lot of things that were getting in the way of people enjoying the record. But now I will definitely say I have to compliment anyone in this business that, especially making vinyl, which this is what this group is. I have to compliment everyone, and they're willing to put up with the aggravation, because that's what it takes. It's tedious, and it's very precise, and trying to get a sense of when it's right and when it isn't, because it isn't as scientific as we'd like it to be. But we know where we need to go, and that pursuit is always there. So that's the challenge. So, this award is, of course, I'm honored to get this award. When they told me about it, I thought, wow, I guess I have been in this a long time. The years just go on and on and on, and no telling how many records I've mastered, because, mastering engineers, we do roughly 250 albums a year. We're not like a mixer. We can run through quite a few records, and so we don't even remember what we did. But yeah, it's been a good business. Anybody who can be any of these businesses, these are choice places to be. In the arts, in music, or dealing with music, or trying to contribute to a better experience of the music. And so I really have to congratulate all of you for really sticking with it, but you're just not done yet. And that's what look, yeah. Thank you. Yeah, well, I said that when CDs came out even. They were pretty bad. And Sony wouldn't even talk to me. And I said, look, guys, I'm just trying to tell you that you're not done. It isn't perfect sound forever. It isn't that good. Oh, no, it's the same ones and zeros and blah. And no. Listen to it. Don't tell me what the technology says. So that's what it really comes down to. Is, and I have people coming in and they'll say, well, the engineer made me a copy, or a DAT or something, or some digital copy, and they said, it didn't sound as good this time, but he said it's digital, so there can't be any loss. And I said, no, you're right. There is loss. There always is loss. So whenever we get there, I don't know. I don't think so. But, it's one of these things it's a pursuit that is probably always going to be there. But the thing is, we're going to keep getting closer to perfection. And we have been. It's just that there's smaller increments maybe, but it's never going to end, and that's the beauty of it. You're always going to have a challenge to go further, to do better, to get more realistic, more natural sound. And it's one of those elusive things that you can actually improve on, though. And it's just like anything. It's like any artist. These are the challenges. But that's what makes it fun. So again, I appreciate the award. And I've had, like 53 years. So I think I'm probably the last man standing here with for working in vinyl. And but I mean, look, I'm just one of these people that knew what they wanted to do, pretty much the areas and so forth, when they were like 8 years old. So I'm just one of those people that was so passionate right from the beginning, and the music was my solace. And I mean, let's face it, when I was, what was I, about 14? My 12 by 12 bedroom had 2 Bozak concert grands in there, about 28 speakers, 2 turntables, amplifiers, and my little bed. That was my bedroom. So I guess I was really hooked on it. So, and it's been great, though. I mean, it's wonderful because it serves music, which is also one of my main reasons for being in this. And so I come from that. I come from hearing really great sounding recordings. And what little did I know sitting in Arizona that I would be the engineer at Contemporary, which is probably one of the, they still, some of those recordings made back in the 50s and early 60s are some of the best sounding recordings ever made, that far back. And so, and I became the engineer there. I mean, what more could you ask for? And so I've had a good time. And I'm still doing it. Okay, thank you.